Today, the eastern half of the island of New Guinea exists as the independent nation of Papua New Guinea, named after the indigenous Papuan peoples who have lived there for thousands of years, while the western half remains under the control of Indonesia. A division that is not the result of geography, culture, or the will of the island's inhabitants, but instead the outcome of European colonial ambitions, Cold War geopolitics, and a prolonged process in which Papuan voices were largely ignored. For most of human history, Papuans lived in small, decentralized communities, primarily in the island's rugged and mountainous interior, without large cities or centralized political structures, leading early European explorers to view the region as economically unimportant. And although Spanish sailors named the island New Guinea because its people reminded them of those living in Guinea in Africa, they made no serious attempt to colonize it, a situation that changed in the 19th century when the Netherlands, already dominant across the Dutch East Indies, established a minimal but permanent presence on the western portion of the island, not because it was particularly valuable, but because it served as a strategic buffer protecting richer colonies such as Java and the Spice Islands. With Dutch rule remaining indirect, exercised through local rulers like the Sultan of Tidore, and supported by no more than a few hundred Dutch officials and settlers at any given time. In 1848, colonial competition led the Dutch and the United Kingdom to divide the island between themselves. Using a straight line that cut across mountains, jungles, and communities without regard for ethnic, cultural, or geographic realities, a border drawn purely for administrative convenience that would later have enormous consequences, as Britain and Germany moved into the eastern half, only for German control to be short-lived. After Australian forces seized the territory during World War I, leaving Australia to administer eastern New Guinea until it eventually achieved independence in 1975. Western New Guinea, however, entered the post-World War II era under far more uncertain circumstances. As the Japanese occupation of Southeast Asia had shattered European authority and fueled nationalist movements, particularly in Indonesia, where a shared experience of wartime brutality helped forge a powerful sense of unity and resistance to any return of colonial rule, culminating in the 1945 Declaration of Independence by Sukarno and Mohammed Hatta, followed by a bitter and violent struggle against the Netherlands. Within this broader decolonization process, Western New Guinea, known in Indonesia as West Irian, occupied an ambiguous position, possessing a small and politically fragmented indigenous population, a very limited Dutch administrative presence, and no meaningful involvement in Indonesia's independence movement. Yet despite these differences, Indonesian leaders increasingly claimed the territory as an integral part of the former Dutch East Indies, especially as tensions with the Netherlands hardened and the discovery of natural resources made relinquishing the region unthinkable. While the Dutch, experiencing a conservative political turn at home, clung to the territory as a symbolic last remnant of imperial power and simultaneously promised Papuans a distant and gradual path toward independence that would remain under Dutch supervision for decades. By the 1950s, Dutch authority barely extended beyond the coastline, with estimates suggesting that even late in the decade, only a quarter of the Papuan population lived under any effective colonial administration, yet the Netherlands doubled down by formally incorporating the territory into the Dutch kingdom and framing its continued control as a bulwark against communism, a claim that gained traction as Indonesia pursued a non-aligned foreign policy that Western powers increasingly viewed with suspicion. Frustration in Jakarta grew as diplomatic efforts at the United Nations failed, leading Indonesia to nationalize Dutch assets, accept Soviet military assistance, and ultimately break diplomatic relations with the Netherlands. While in 1961 the Dutch took a decisive step by supporting the creation of a Papuan Representative Council, and allowing national symbols, including a new flag, to be raised, effectively signaling a move toward independence, a development that enraged the Indonesian leadership, which had long abandoned any notion of Papuan self-determination. Indonesia responded with military pressure through Operation Trikora, inserting troops into the territory and risking open conflict. A prospect that alarmed the United States, as President John F. Kennedy feared a wider Cold War escalation and therefore forced negotiations by making it clear that NATO would not support the Netherlands in a war with Indonesia, resulting in the 1962 New York Agreement under which the Dutch transferred control of Western New Guinea to Indonesia, on the condition that the Papuan population would later be allowed to decide its own future. That promise culminated in the 1969 Act of Free Choice, a process in which Indonesia selected just 1,000 representatives to vote on behalf of the entire population under conditions widely criticized as coercive, producing a unanimous result in favor of integration with Indonesia and igniting long-lasting resentment and resistance, as Papuan independence movements launched a low-intensity insurgency that continues to this day, making Western New Guinea one of the most enduring and unresolved legacies of colonial borders, where a line drawn by European powers in 1848 still determines the political fate of millions nearly 2 centuries later.